On a stormy June dawn in 1215, King John of England stands on shaky ground at Runnymede. Heavy clouds reflect the turmoil in his own heart. All around him, barons in grim armour lean on their swords, waiting in silence for the reluctant king. In his hands is a parchment, the Magna Carta, its red wax seal cracking under the weight of centuries-old grudges. John's knuckles whiten on the quill, and for a moment he seems as helpless as a cornered fox. The crown at his feet is about to bind him to a world he never intended to create. To understand this moment, we must rewind the clock. John was born the youngest scion of the mighty King Henry II and Eleanor of Aquitaine, a boy derided as Lackland because his inheritance was nearly nothing. In the royal nursery, he watched in dark wonder as his elder brothers schemed and quarrelled. His brother Henry rebelled and died young, Geoffrey perished on the crusade, and the legendary Richard the Lionheart strode off to the Holy Land, leaving John the only man standing beside a fading throne. These early years of watching intrigue taught John his first lessons. Smiles could hide steel, and loyalty could turn to ash. When Richard finally claimed the crown in 1189, John was left to govern England in his brother's absence. He played the loyal sibling, even freeing Richard's mother from captivity, but behind closed doors he nurtured darker ambitions. In the taverns of London and the woods of Sherwood he conspired. He negotiated with foreign captors who held Richard, trying to keep the Lionheart a prisoner of fortune so he could seize the throne for himself. The scheme nearly succeeded until the king himself returned, clearing his throat and finding John waiting. Richard chose mercy and a laugh when he caught John empty-handed, plotting for all his whispered promises. John had brought nothing to secure his ransom, but the stab of betrayal had been delivered. It was into that volatile world that King Richard suddenly died on campaign in 1199. The throne passed to John, the overlooked son, at last. But before he could wrap the crown around his brow, a scruffy, boyish figure stepped forward with equal claim. Arthur of Brittany, the son of John's late brother Geoffrey. Fierce and proud, Arthur believed himself rightful heir, but on John's orders the boy was captured at Chinon. He vanished into Rouen Castle, swallowed by English distrust. Some say John himself dealt the final blow. Others whispered that the young Arthur was starved or thrown from a tower. Either way, the halls where John's court dined lost a crown prince in the night. England stood aghast. The new king had already shown a heart dark enough to still a child's pulse. This act of blood set a tone of fear in John's kingdom, a reputation he would wear like a cloak. Now John wore the crown of an empire stretched half across France. He avenged old slies, hating anyone who opposed him, and seized lands from his enemies. At 34 he cast aside his first wife and pursued a teenage heiress, Isabella of Angoulême, igniting a feud with her powerful uncle. That quarrel drew the mighty French king Philip II into war. At first John's banners were lifted high, and even he routed the enemy once, but it was a transient victory. The proud duchies of Normandy and Anjou slipped through his fingers when John showed disdain for the barons who served him. Noble knights in their graceful armour, once loyal to the English crown, now deserted by the dozens and sailed east to support Philip. Towns that used to flourish under the Angevin lions changed to the fleur-de-lis, and Normandy, the jewel of his birthright, was snatched away in the summer of 1204. By dawn's light that year, John held only a thinner, emptier England. His empire collapsed like an old castle wall after an unseen hammer stroke. Back home, King John's facade of control cracked into chaos. His mind, once sharp and cunning, sank under doubt and rage. To fund armies, he squeezed his people until they wept, landing taxes on every knight's farm and filling the royal coffers with coin pressed from suffering. He treated nobles as serfs, demanding castles, hostages and fines with equal cruelty. Any disagreement was met with injustice. One knight who sided with France was locked in a death cage and given only stale bread. One winter's dawn found John's men in a dark cell, uncovering the bodies of a noblewoman and her child, the victims of starvation in the king's name. Their frozen eyes stared at nothing but betrayal. In the great halls of London and Dover, whispers spread of the king who could watch a mother die with her son by starvation, uninterested in mercy. The Pope himself cursed England for John's overreach. When John blocked the election of a new Archbishop, Innocent III unleashed a spiritual storm. No bells tolled in Christendom, church doors remained shut, and the people grew desperate without mass or sacraments. Even John's church allies turned against him, praying for his downfall. By 1209, the king was excommunicated, left alone to brood in a kingdom that felt like a foreign land. The barons, once cowed by his threats, began to cluster together in secret, forging pacts and plotting. By 1214, the king made one last gamble to regain glory. He crossed into France again, gathering loyalist lords. That July morning on the Flemish field of Bovine, the combined armies of England, the Holy Roman Empire, and religious French courts clashed with King Philip's forces. The battle ended with John's allies shattered, England's pride humbled, and news of defeat rippled through the night, replaced with the cold reality that the tide of power had turned against him on every front. When King John returned to England that winter, he found the kingdom in a state of civil war. His trusted nobles threw open castle gates to his enemies. The French prince, Louis of France, swaggered on English soil with a handful of disillusioned barons. Desperate and isolated, John did the unthinkable. On a damp summer morning at Runnymede, he signed his name below a list of laws that he hated. The Magna Carta was more than a parchment, it was a muzzle, a yoke. The barons sat back as if the king were finally tamed. But John's eyes burned coldly as he affixed his seal. He understood every line like a poisonous dagger aimed at his power. But he had betrayed too many, trusted too few, and he smiled a bitter, twisted smile, knowing he could never turn back this tide of history, or maybe never again get such a chance. True to his nature, King John abandoned the charter as soon as the ink dried. He raised his banner to war once more, belligerent and unbroken, but the spirit of rebellion had been unleashed. French knights marched across the southern coastline, barons rallied behind young Prince Louis, and England's throne sat on the shoulders of a king who now feared everyone in sight. Hunted by spies and rebels, even in his own court, John rode for York, and then into the bleak stone of Newark Castle. Sickness crept over him like a traitor in the night, and by October 1216, the once feared lion's brother was a broken man, racked by fever and pain. Surrounded by nuns and the lingering curses of those he wronged, King John drew his final, ragged breath. The people of England believed they knew the story, a monster king stripped of his lands, feared and hated, felled by his own sins. Yet as John's body was carried to a humble tomb in Worcester Cathedral, strange truth began to rise from the ashes of his reign. The rebels, exhausted but triumphant, reissued the Great Charter under the boy King Henry, John's helpless son. Those same barons who had vowed vengeance now raised Magna Carta like a lodestar for something greater than themselves. Generations would echo its words as law, while John's own name faded to legend and loathing. In the end, the fallen king's legacy took an unexpected turn. For all his cruelty and cunning, King John became the unwitting father of change he never intended. The charter he abhorred lived on, quietly carving new boundaries for power. Maybe this is the final twist, a tyrant whose failures sparked a revolution, a bruised country that clawed new rise from a fate written by a tyrant's hand. So imagine standing in the midst of Runnymede today, feel the weight of centuries and echo of that first signature that bowled a king to his knees. John is long gone, but the memory lingers. In that legacy lies a cruel irony. The man who betrayed so many left the world something he never saw, the rule of law. But in death, he hoped for glory or fear, yet it was a new order, born from the very collapse of his reign, that truly outlived him.